got everything hand tightened now, so now we're going to go ahead is torque everything down to 20 foot-pound torque. Not a lot for these bolts. And we're just going to follow the order. 1, 2. Alright, got all the front engine cover bolts tightened down. Now we're going to go ahead and put on the belt tensioner. It's going to hang from this top bolt right there, and then you're going to put in your long bolt in the bottom. It's a little tight in here. Alright, next we're going to put on the crankshaft pulley. Line up this little key mark with the TDC mark and tighten it down. Alright, now with somebody helping me in the car, I'm going to torque down the crankshaft pulley. Go ahead and push the brake down, Vic. Because there's no way. Alright, now that we got the crankshaft pulley back on, we're going to put on the belts. I already got the water pump belt kind of lined up here. Now I'm going to need my 21mm socket, and we're going to rotate the crankshaft as well as pulling on the towel at the same time and pulling up. Alright, the alternator belt is a little bit easier to put on. As you can see, I've kind of already looped it around the top here and draped it around the bottom of the compressor. You can't really see it because it's dark in here. Then I kind of come over around the crankshaft area, and I have my wrench already on the belt tensioner. So all you're going to want to do is go counterclockwise on the belt tensioner, then slide this belt underneath the belt tensioner. It'll get slack, and then your alternator belt will be in place. Kind of show you what it looks like when it's on, but let me get a light in here. Hexorcism online service manual shows you a good example of what it looks like when the serpentine belt is back on. It's really easy, guys. It's easier than the water pump pulley belt. Alright, next I'm going to put the spark plugs back in the cylinder head. I'm going to lower them back in there with the best $5 ever spent, so I don't just drop them in, and then tighten them down to torque spec. Alright, now that the spark plugs are in there hand tightened, I'm going to tighten or torque them all down to 14 foot-pound of torque as per the service manual. Alright, we got our rear main housing to go. I've got our gasket ready. I'm going to try to come around the back and get this on. Once you get into place, rotate the crankshaft approximately 30 degrees. Now, hold with one hand, come around with the other. Let me tell you something. Putting the rear main housing on this motor while it's in the car is probably the hardest part of this entire process. You know, because you got to put RTV in a couple corners, and you know, you got like 10-15 minutes before it dries. It took me till the 4th attempt of trying this and finally getting it on the car. I actually had to have my girlfriend come out here and help hold the housing once I had the top pilot screw in place and walk around the other side. When I did it on my car, I was able to do it by myself, but for some reason tonight I could not get the screws to line up, and when they don't line up, it's falling all over the place, and RTV is bumping into camshafts and stuff. It's a pain in the butt. If you have somebody help you, guide, so you can start finger threading the rear main housing on, it's a big help. If you try to do it by yourself, you're going to look like me right now. Just pissed. I should have been done with this part a half an hour ago, but it took me an extra half an hour, but it is what it is. So, moving along. Alright guys, we're going to go ahead and get our oil pan on now. We're going to go 71 inch-pound torque, and then bump it up with another round to 97 inch-pound torque. And a good suggestion, if you want to not bump anything as you put the oil pan in, start from this side first, pin it all the way up against the wall, then tilt up. You won't bump anything. You won't bump your crankshaft, your oil pump, or anything like that. Not your crankshaft, your oil pump. Alright, now we got our oil pan on secure. Let's start getting out our valve cover gasket and getting our valve cover ready. Just gonna place this around in here and get this thrown on the car. Looks like spaghetti. Alright guys, ready for the valve cover gasket, or head cover, whatever you want to call it. And once again, we're going to take our trusty Mazda RTV and put some more lube down, because everybody loves the lube. A little bit right there. We're just following what the online service manual says. Right there. Some of the keg. You kind of go a quarter of the way up on the exhaust cam cap for the rear housing. And then out a little bit. Alright, our RTV is ready to go. Now let's align our valve cover. Now that we get everything finger tightened, we're going to go ahead and torque down to 54 inch-pound. Now that we get our valve cover on, I went ahead and slid the exhaust manifold back over the studs, and now we're going to take our 5 bolts for the exhaust header, which are 14mm, and tighten them down to, I believe it's 47 foot-pound of torque. Alright, our exhaust manifold is in place. Next up, we're going to slide the heat shield back over. Alright, next up is going to be these 4 14mm bolts and washers that go with this bracket, that go at the bottom of the header exhaust manifold. They kind of hold it in place so it doesn't shake, kind of creates less noise. I'm not going to videotape that. Trust me, it's at the bottom. It's very simple. Put on 4 14mm bolts and you're good there. Alright, next up we're going to finish up fuel. This is the high pressure fuel pump housing protector. You don't really need this. I mean, you do run a ground to right here, and this does have like a little clip that holds in one of your parts of your harnesses. It's up to you whether you want to keep it or not. It's not my vehicle, so I'm going to put it back on the car. Sometimes this can take some extensive time, so I'm not going to film myself attempting it, but let me just say, you have to reach around the back here, get into place, and then screw in 2 bolts. Mess around with it. It could take you 30 seconds, it could take you 5 minutes. Make sure you put on this hard line, this hard fuel line right here, come on, focus, before you actually put on the fuel pump housing. You're going to need that on first, otherwise if you put the protector on, you're going to block yourself out of the way. Alright, next let's get our fuel injectors into position. Alright, next we're going to come in with our fuel rail. Now in the fuel rail, there's 3 O-rings inside each one. Make sure all 3 of these are lined up properly. Otherwise you could end up with like an injector leak or something like that. You have a brown one at the top, an orange one in the middle, and like a turquoise one in the very back. Make sure none of those are blocking the hole and they're all 3 lined up, so when you slip it on, it's right down the middle. Just be careful, take your time when you do this. See, I already have my 4 bolts for the fuel rail right here. I'm going to hand thread on immediately. Nice and easy. I don't want to knock anything around. And for the fuel rail 10mm bolts, we're going to tighten them down to 19 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, this is the second to last main piece that we're going to connect to our fuel pressure, high pressure fuel pump and rear main housing. This is just going to slide over the back. You push the clip down, and this will be the part that your actual valve cover seal clips onto. It's really easy. Just slide it over the top and then push that purple clip down. You hear that little pop, then it's on there. It's on there nice and snug. It ain't going nowhere. Alright, before we put on our manifold, let's start reconnecting all our injector clips, because those are going to need to be in place before we lower the intake manifold down. Before we lower our intake manifold, there's some clips on the bottom you want to connect. If you're running the Veris Engineering air oil separator, make sure you have those tubes running beforehand. Otherwise, you're going to give yourself a hard time. Alright, next, after we have our injectors plugged in, we're going to go ahead and install our coil packs here, just to also, get rid of some of the clutter. And the coil packs kind of lined up the other end of the intake manifold, so it takes away some of the guesswork of trying to figure out what plug goes to what, because it kind of sets the mark there. It sets it up, points you in the right direction, because there are about 9 different plugs over here, and it's kind of a mystery. Once you get these plugged in, and you see where these dangle, once you have the manifold in, these will come around the other side of the manifold. Plug in our oil control valve and our 4 8mm. Okay, now that I've double and triple checked everything that should be plugged in already, should be plugged in, because once you get this manifold in there, if you got this block in the way, you have to take the whole thing out again to get to whatever you're getting to. A little tip that I would do is this bottom bolt. Let me see if I can get this on the camera. This bottom bolt to the manifold, when you get this into place, screw this one in first, because if you screw in the top, what do you got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up here first, it's hard to align that bottom bolt, and that bottom bolt is the hardest one to get in out of the 6 manifold bolts. So do this one first, then come up here and tighten these down, because this one is probably one of the most frustrating things of this install, other than installing the rear main housing or getting around the front strut bar. This is probably like rank number 2 or 3. So do this one first. Alright, all our intake manifold bolts are hand tightened. Now we're going to torque them down to 15 foot-pound torque. Alright, let's finish reconnecting our throttle body here. Alright, everything else in the manifold is reconnected. Let's start hooking back up our Veris air oil separator. installing our Mishimoto intake again. Nice. Alright guys, everything is bolted up pretty much. Now at this point I'm just adding coolant. Our coolant reservoir is back in. Everything that should be on the car is pretty much on the car, except for the strut bar, the oil pan cover. I leave those off just in case anything goes wrong. This is a coolant concentrate, so I'm just doing 1 bottle of coolant, 1 bottle of water, 1 bottle of coolant, 1 bottle of water, until it comes back up, and we're going to leave this here when the engine turns on to bleed the cooling system of any air. And last but not least, let's put the battery back in the car.